All right. Good morning. I'm Robert Summercrast. I'm Dean of the Terry College of Business at the University of Georgia. I want to welcome all of you to our Terry Third Thursday Speaker Series. Now, some of you, I believe, are here for the first time, and so I also want to welcome you to the TEAC, as we call it, the Terry Executive Education Center. This is our home base in Atlanta, where we run a number of programs and alumni activities. It's the home of our executive education, our executive MBA, and a number of other programs. We have a dedicated group of volunteers who help us put on this Terry Third Thursday speaker series. We've got Diane Bloodworth up here in the front. She and Cecil Cook are primarily responsible for this year's speaker series, and so I want to recognize the work that they've done. We also enjoy generous support from corporate sponsors and partners. Our premier corporate sponsor for Terry Third Thursday is the Bank of North Georgia. Do we have anyone from Bank of North Georgia with us today? No. All right. Well, we thank them for their support anyway. We have Deloitte, which has recently renewed its sponsorship of Terry Third Thursday. Any Deloitte representatives? Well, we appreciate the support. We also have two media sponsors, Public Broadcasting Atlanta and the Atlanta Business Chronicle, and I know we have some people from those organizations with us. So thanks to all our sponsors. I want to spend just a minute and talk about the upcoming programs in the Terry Third Thursday Speaker Series. This morning's program is the last program for the calendar year. You'll have other things to do on the third Thursday of December, I think. But we're going to have a strong lineup as we move into 2009. On January 15th, our speaker will be Randy Jackson. Now, Randy is the Director of Human Resources and Administration for Kia Motors' new assembly plant, which is located in Georgia, as I think all of us know. Randy is a 1966 Terry College of Business graduate, and he'll be introducing us to what Kia Motors has planned for Georgia and the economic development that they'll be bringing to our state. In February, on February 19th, we have Jerry Wilson from Coca-Cola with us. He'll be talking about brand management. Jerry is the Senior Vice President at Coke with responsibilities for strategic alliance, including the McDonald's chain. Jerry is also a Terry grad from 1978 in economics. And on March 19th, Doug Curling will be our speaker. Doug is the former president and chief operating officer of ChoicePoint, and he will be bringing some of his experiences to us that Thursday morning. You can register for any of these programs at our Terry College website, or if you've got questions, talk with me or any of the representatives from the Terry College with us today. Now, I want to quickly mention a couple other events that are coming up. In just a few days, on December 3rd, we have our Economic Outlook here in Atlanta. It's going to be at the World Congress Center. We'll have Steve Forbes delivering the national forecast. I'll be delivering the state forecast. And I have no doubt that this is going to be a program with a lot of exciting things that seem to change every day for us to talk about. You can register for the Economic Outlook on our website as well. And finally, as we look forward to the spring, I would like you to mark your calendars because we have our annual Alumni Awards and Gala coming up on April 25th. As you registered, you probably saw these save the date cards. So it's going to be here in Buckhead at the Intercontinental Hotel, a black tie event, and it has grown in prestige and certainly is a very fun way to spend an evening. So I hope you'll be there with us. And now let's move on to our speaker. We're very pleased this morning to be joined by Tom Smith. Tom is the president and CEO of Oglethorpe Power Corporation, and he's been serving in that capacity since 1999. Oglethorpe Power is an electric membership corporation, and Tom is going to tell us a little bit more about exactly what that means during his remarks. Tom previously served in several financial roles at Oglethorpe, From 1997 to 1999, he was Vice President for Finance, to Senior Financial Officer, and then Chief Financial Officer before being named CEO. Between 1990 and 1997, Tom was the Senior Vice President of the Rural Utility Banking Group and of CoBank, and in that role he managed the Eastern Division and the rural utilities. Tom also had an earlier tenure with Oglethorpe Power between 1979 and 1990, where he worked for the utilities financial services area as manager and eventually vice president. Tom is a certified public accountant. He has a master's degree, or master's degrees, from Georgia Tech and my alma mater, Purdue. He earned a bachelor's degree from Catawba College in Salisbury, North Carolina. In 2003, he was one of the national recipients of the Ellis Island Medal of Honor. And last January, for the second time, Tom was named in Georgia Trends magazine's list of the 100 most influential Georgians. So please join me in welcoming Tom Smith to Terry Third Thursday.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, okay, I'm just checking to see if you're awake. He did say Georgia Tech. I know you heard that, and makes me a little nervous being surrounded by so many bulldogs all in one location, but I think we'll work through this. Actually, you've made me feel very welcome already. Can you hear me okay, everybody? The last time I was surrounded by this many bulldogs or felt outnumbered like this, it was a much more hostile environment. A place you all call Sanford Stadium. You might have heard of it. So thanks for making me feel very welcome today. I did try to do my part. You know, they say when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So maybe when in Athens, do as the Athenians do. So I did wear my red tie. And I emailed the presentation over yesterday, but just in case, I brought a flash drive, and I hope you'll notice the color is red and black. So I'm trying to get into the spirit of participation, but I don't want you to confuse it with the old adage, if you can't beat them, join them. That's not me, so don't think about that for a second. I have a 2.5-hour presentation for you this morning. I hope you'll hang in there with me. I'm going to try to do it in 30 minutes. So I'm going to flash through this pretty quickly. And what I'm going to try to do is give you a little information about what Oglethorpe is and what we do here in the state of Georgia from an electricity perspective. But the first thing I'm going to tell you about Oglethorpe is that we're a cooperative. And I don't know if anybody in here even knows what a cooperative is. But let's get started with it. And let me tell you that generally speaking, cooperatives are privately held entities, in our case a corporation, owned by its members, and its members typically come together to form a cooperative for aggregation purposes when they need a service or a product that they can't do by themselves, but by joining with others, then they have the critical mass to be able to do that, and I'll describe that a little more for you in a minute. Or to gain some economies of scale, some bargaining power, maybe like a purchasing cooperative that could have a bigger presence or enter a market. Generally speaking, we're not for profit. That doesn't mean that we don't make a profit. We're just not in business to make a profit. In fact, any profit that we make, we ultimately return back to our members who are our owners. They're the ones that pay the bills. The profits come from them, and in turn we give it back to them. So it's a very efficient and good model. I don't know, you might be surprised at some of the names I'll toss to you here in a second of cooperatives. Now you know already one of the things you can take away is that Oglethorpe Power Corporation indeed is a cooperative. But here's some other names that are cooperatives that might surprise you. Land O'Lakes. You ever get those little butter packages and have Land O'Lakes on there? They're a cooperative. Ace Hardware. How about that? A cooperative. True Value. Also a cooperative. Southern States, you might know they're a cooperative because their name is Southern States Cooperative. So, Ocean Spray, how about that? A cooperative. You see a lot of agribusiness cooperatives, especially food growers and citrus growers. So Sunkist is a cooperative. Here's one that's pretty interesting. Anybody ever shop at a Piggly Wiggly grocery store? They're a cooperative. How about that? And then the one that always surprises me, I know it, and then I forget it, and then I'm surprised every year when I see it, the Associated Press. The AP is actually a cooperative. So there are a lot of cooperatives out there. In fact, the biggest one in the country in the United States is a holding company called CHS Incorporated. They do they do some grain buying and handling. They do some food processing, but they're also into petroleum and pipelines. Their annual revenues over $17 billion a year. So you can see cooperatives can be substantial in size. Now I'm going to move on and talk to you now specifically about electric cooperatives. And you may or may not know, or have even heard of an electric cooperative. We have them in the state of Georgia. I'll describe them in a second. But there's about 1,000 electric cooperatives in the United States. And surprisingly, the birthplace for electric cooperatives is right here in Georgia. And there is a story with that, and as it turns out, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, back in the 20s, as you may know, was suffering from polio and suffered with paralysis in his legs and was confined to a wheelchair pretty much. And he'd read a story about somebody who had a similar condition that had bathed in the Warm Springs here in Georgia, actually a town called Warm Springs. And so he decided to venture down to Warm Springs. It's a train trip. I mean, it takes him all day to travel here, but it was worth it. But when I think about that train trip and all day, I am reminded of a friend of mine who did something similar, taking a very long train excursion, and he chose to travel through the night. So he actually reserved a compartment in the sleeper car. And as it was time for him to retire for the evening, he climbed into his compartment, which was on the top. And as he settled in, it was still very cold and chilly, and he recalled seeing some blankets just across the aisle. He also recalled seeing this very attractive woman in the compartment below him. So he leaned over and said, "Ma'am, could I ask you a favor, please? Would you get up out of bed and grab one of those blankets and hand it to me?" And to his surprise, in the most sexy voice he had ever heard, she said, "Well, I have a better idea. How about we do this just for tonight? Why don't we just pretend to be married?" And he thought, whoa, this is a great thing. So he said, "Yeah, that sounds really good to me." To which she replied, "Mighty fine then. Now you can get out of bed and get your own damn blanket." Somebody's left pretty hard over there. I think you might have been there. But fact of the matter is that FDR would make these train trips to Georgia and bathe in the Warm Springs, 88 degrees constant temperature. He was so enamored with it, he'd make a trip every year. He used to stay in a place called the Meriwether Inn. I'm not exactly sure where that is or if it still exists. But then he would travel by car to the Warm Springs. And as it turns out, one day traveling back and forth, he began to get a flat tire on the car. They pulled into a general store. And the people at the general store, they didn't see many cars in those days. They were very eager to help, and they assisted, and they actually fixed his tire. But FDR was stunned that the general store did not have electricity. And he said, "One day we'll bring you electricity." For you see, anybody here from Georgia Power or Southern Company just by chance? All right, don't be offended by my remarks, but way back then, the investor-owned utility didn't deem it profitable enough to run electric lines out in the countryside for a house here or a farm there, for a light bulb, for an electric iron, Barbara. So, but he said, "One day, I'll see that you get electricity." Well, he was so enamored with Warm Springs that he built a house there. Warm Springs, by the way, is outside of Pine Mountain, Georgia, which is very close to Callaway Gardens. So that most everybody knows where Callaway is, so that should give you a perspective on where it is. And he built this little cottage. Well, in 1932, FDR became president of the United States, and this became known as the Little White House here in Georgia. And they used to hold a lot of meetings there. And this is where the genesis for rural electrification started. And in 1935, FDR formed the Rural Electrification Administration, and then in 1936 they passed the act that actually gave life to this program that still exists today. And what that was, the REA, the Rural Electrification Administration, basically provided the engineering support, the technical capabilities for people in rural areas who wanted to come together and form their own co-op to be able to develop and provide a service that individually they couldn't do themselves. So around the country, REA co-ops began to pop up all over the place, and Georgia was no exception. And I'm really pleased to present this next chart to Georgia Bulldogs. We refer to it as the red map, and you can see why. The red area on the map represents the portion of the state of Georgia that electric cooperatives serve. Are you stunned? Everybody knows Georgia Power and the Southern Company. Hey, we are the other guys. But look at the land area that we control. Now, as you might guess, looking at that map, the white areas represent the more populated areas like the city of Atlanta, Macon, Savannah, Augusta, and the red areas, at least initially, represented very, very rural areas, and that's where the cooperatives formed. As you can imagine, as Atlanta has grown, for example, and begins to sprawl out, all of its growth as it continues to expand is in rural electric cooperative territories. Names that you might know like Shawnee EMC, Jackson EMC, over towards Athens, Walton EMC, Cobb EMC, just in fact 42 EMCs in the state of Georgia, people that came together to be able to form their own distribution company. They continued to buy their electricity from Georgia Power, who would produce it and send it in bulk through transmission system to their local distribution point. But then they were the distributors. Think of it that way. They were the distributors. In fact, let's take a look at this chart, which is tells the story of how electricity begins and gets to you at your home. It starts in that upper left-hand corner with some type of power plant, some plant that produces electricity. That electricity then is injected into the transmission grid. And you see the tall transmission lines. Think of this as the interstate of electricity, but these are the big towers that you see that move electricity in bulk long miles. And then ultimately, it steps down in voltage till you get to the bottom and comes through a smaller distribution substation, and then is delivered locally, either in overhead lines that you see along roads or in your neighborhood, or for the newer developments now, underground lines. And so traditionally, a Georgia Power or a Southern Company would do all these things. They would generate their own electricity, they'd have their own bulk transmission, and they'd have their own distribution system. It's all contained within the one organization. But as electric distribution cooperatives developed, they formed really this piece down here. I'm going to use a pointer, so I'm sorry if you can't see it on the center screen. I'll just do it on the center screen. This part right here really was the job that electric distribution companies did. They still relied on Georgia Power here in the state of Georgia for the generation and the bulk transmission. But over time, Georgia Power forced some very, very large rate increases on the distribution systems. And this is not unique to Georgia. This happened all around the country. So distribution systems decided, hey, we need to form another cooperative. We need to form another cooperative, a generation and transmission cooperative. And so about 50 of those sprang up around the country over the years, and Oglethorpe was a generation and transmission cooperative. Now, we did something a little unique here in Georgia that's not so common in other states. We decided to make our own generation cooperative. That's Oglethorpe, and that's what I do today, just this power production side. And then we formed a separate cooperative, Georgia Transmission Corporation, which does the bulk transmission. So it's to understand the structure of how cooperatives work in the state of Georgia, you need to understand that the local distributors, the EMCs that I described earlier, they do the distribution. Oglethorpe makes it, and Georgia Transmission delivers it in bulk. All of these functions are done internal to Georgia Power. They do all of them themselves. So that's the story, and so consequently, as I said, Oglethorpe was born in 1974 for that purpose, to really aggregate the needs of the members, to be able to negotiate with the Georgia Power or other power suppliers for their power supply arrangements, presumably better terms, some economies of scale, better pricing, and then ultimately to develop and own its own power generation. And that's what we've done. We're owned by 38 of those 42 EMCs in the state of Georgia. The 3 in the very northwest of the corner are actually served by TVA, by the Tennessee Valley Authority. and then one other system is supplied 100% by Southern Company. We own generating facilities throughout Georgia, and it covers a variety of types. One of the things about owning generation facilities is that it's a very capital-intensive business. So we become big business right out of the box. Just building power plants takes a lot of capital, as you know, so we have a very big balance sheet. And you probably have seen this from time to time in Georgia Trend magazine. And if you look at the top, this was just published in last month's magazine, if you look at the top private companies in Georgia, there's some names you really recognize. Cox Enterprises. Everywhere I speak, I compete with leaf blowers, so I apologize for that. They just follow me around. Racetrack, of course you're familiar with them. Chick-fil-A, a common name. But as you were going down the list and you got to number 7 and you saw Oglethorpe Power Corporation, if you were just doing this for the first time, you'd probably say, well, who the heck are they? So hopefully when you leave today, you'll have a sense for who we are. But we are the 7th largest private company in the state of Georgia based on revenues. There's the revenues in the column there, and you can see that we click in around 1.1 or 1.2 billion in revenues every year. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we do own a variety of power plants around the state, but here's going to be a couple of takeaways for you. There are 2 nuclear plants in the state, Plant Vogtle and Plant Hatch, and you may know and read about those from time to time, and you always hear Southern Company and Georgia Power, but you probably didn't know that Oglethorpe actually owns 30% of each of those. Georgia Power actually owns less than 50%. Yet they're the operator, or Southern Nuclear is the operator, so the ones you always hear about. But we're a big player in nuclear. We also own a couple of coal plants, Plant Share near Macon and Plant Wansley. Those are also co-owned with Georgia Power, and you'll hear a lot about Plant Share. Plant Share has 4 units, 4 operating units as part of the makeup of that plant. We actually own 60% of units 1 and 2, but none of units 3 and 4. So we're a big owner in a couple of the units there. We also own a plant that's pretty neat that I'd like to describe to you a little bit up near Rome, Georgia, the Rocky Mountain Hydroelectric Plant. While we own a variety of power plants around the state, we kind of affectionately refer to this plant as our flagship. And I'll show you a little bit about that in a second. We own 75% of that, as you can see. Georgia Power owns the other 25%, but we are the operator for that plant. Here's a picture of Rocky Mountain, the powerhouse. And, you know, most people really don't think power plants are attractive. In fact, most people think they're pretty ugly. But if you're in my business and you can take a picture at sunset or sunrise like this, this is beautiful. That's a gorgeous power plant right there. Now, what you're seeing is the powerhouse, the very top of it. It's about a 16-story building, with most of it actually being under the water. Now, take a good look at that. I'm going to show you another picture, and you're going to have to really squint to see where that powerhouse really is. Now we're going to go up in the air and take an aerial picture, and here's what the Rocky Mountain Pump Storage Hydroelectric Plant really looks like. And that powerhouse I was talking to you about is right here. Okay, right here in the bottom. This is a really, really neat power plant, and I just want to take a minute and describe to you, so when you leave here today and somebody says pump storage hydro, you're going to know what I'm talking about. And it's as simple as thinking about the toilet you have in your house. What we have is an upper reservoir, which is like the tank on your toilet. What we have is a generator and a lower reservoir. Basically, to produce electricity, you flush the toilet. You open this thing up and you let the water come out of this reservoir. It comes down through a big drain pipe in the middle of the mountain and pushes out through the bottom here through 3 turbines that turn and generate electricity. And it's really, really a cool thing. Now you say, well, what happens when you drain all the water out of the top? Well, guess what we do? During the nighttime, roughly when everybody is sleeping, turned off your lights, demand for electricity much lower, we use some of that excess generation capability and reverse the generators and pump the water out of the bottom back up to the top. And we do this every day. Sometimes we do it twice a day, but we do it at least once every day. Now, it does take 5 megawatt hours to pump the water up, and when we release it, we only get 4 of them back. And they say, Tom, you just can't make that up in volume. That just doesn't work. You're using 5 to get 4. Well, here's the deal, and I bet you'll understand it. When we're pumping it up, it's costing us about $20, just let me use a number, $20 to pump it up. when we generate it, we're selling it or getting the equivalent value out of it for $50 and sometimes $100 and sometimes $500 and even sometimes $1,000. So if I can buy 5 at 20, throw one of them away, and sell the other 4 that I have left for 100 each, it's going to work out pretty good, and you can make that up in volume. So that's Rocky Mountain Pump Storage Hydro Plant. It's the only one of its type in the state. I think we have a pump storage hydro plant over on the South Carolina Georgia border, but this one it's our flagship. It's a beautiful site, and I'll volunteer today to host one of your meetings at a future date. It would probably have to be lunch, not breakfast. At this site, it would be well worth your while to tour it. Let me talk a few minutes as I'm watching the clock a little bit here on what's happening in the electricity market, not just in the state of Georgia, but around the country. And I'll blow through these pretty quickly, but to give you a flavor as to what's happening, that red line, which is really the most relevant one, is what we call Central Appalachian coal. That's coal we purchase out of West Virginia, Pennsylvania, maybe Ohio. And if you go back in time, it starts in 1997 and runs 10 or 12 years forward. We used to buy that stuff for about $25 a ton. And then you can see that it bumped up in the early 2000s to about $50 a ton. That doubled. Coal prices doubled. And then they doubled again and went up to around $100. They actually spiked all the way up to $140. And I think with a little bit of the depressed economy, it's come back down to around $100. But the message here is our coal prices are way up. Very, very expensive. Same thing with natural gas. This is a chart that just runs from the end of 2006 and looks forward with our forecast through 2010. The purpose of this chart is to show you something that you probably already know, is that natural gas prices can be very volatile. And when they're high, that translates into a high cost of electricity. When they're lower, we can do a little better. But some of that's a little bit out of our control. We're very, very happy to have that ownership in nuclear that I talked about before, but look what's happened to the price of uranium, for crying out loud. And this really happened, you can see it starting up in the 2004-2005 time frame when all of us that are interested in building the next generation of nuclear plants said, we're thinking about building the next generation of nuclear plants. And the uranium ore mines said, okay, our price just went up. And it really spiked up big time, but as it did, it pulled some others back into the market. Supply seems to be balancing and the price seems to be coming back down. The price of uranium, though, is only a small component of the actual nuclear fuel that we burn. And here you can see the effect on our price while it's increasing is not dramatic. And let me say that in a nuclear plant, the real cost associated with operating a nuclear plant is your fixed cost in building it. They're outrageously expensive. But once you have them, they're very, very inexpensive to operate. In fact, show and tell time, I brought today a uranium nuclear fuel pellet. There it is. Can you see it? Actually, it's not a real nuclear fuel pellet. You would not be very happy with me if it was, but it's what they look like. It's that size. I'll set it right there and you can kind of see it. The reason this is a very dramatic thing, it's hard to see, right? Very hard to see in the back. It's really small. That little pellet will produce the same amount of electricity as approximately 1,800 pounds of coal. Can you believe that? It's true. Amazing, that little pellet. So nuclear, we're very pleased to be in nuclear. I'm going to show you in a minute some plans to expand our nuclear facility. Oglethorpe gets about 40% of its energy from nuclear. That's twice the national average. Around the country, the average is about 20% nuclear. We always use France as kind of that way out there benchmark where France gets 78 to 80% of their energy from nuclear. But we're pleased to have it. It's very clean, doesn't emit any CO2, no greenhouse gases, very efficient to operate, and very reliable. So we're very interested in expanding it. So as I talk about expanding nuclear, everybody says, well, Tom, what are you doing on renewables? Well, look, we love renewables, and we do as many renewables as we can. But here's a wind chart for the United States. Dark colors are good. White is not good. I'm sure you can find Georgia on there, and you can see Georgia is white. There's a little bit of color up there. I think that's on top of Lookout Mountain up near Chattanooga. And then we also know that the wind does tend to blow a little bit offshore, off the coast of Savannah, out in the Atlantic. But if you look at this, this really represents not a great opportunity for Georgia to build wind turbines. Really, you can see heavy concentration out in the Dakotas, in the Midwest, in the Plains area, where if you've ever been there, the wind blows all the time, and it blows hard all the time. Well, the wind blows some here, but not nearly enough to sustain turbines turning. They would be on and off. And then because we wouldn't turn as much, the cost to build them would cause your electric rates to go up 2, 3, 4 times what they are today. So it'd be very cost ineffective for us here in Georgia. So then you say, hey, what about solar? Well, not to your surprise, I suspect, red is good. And the hotbed, no pun intended, the hotbed for solar is out in the desert Southwest. And not a surprise, where the sun shines very intensely all the time. Now, Georgia does show some modest potential for solar, and we are experimenting with it somewhat, but the technology still to install solar is so daggone expensive. For what we get out of it, we'd have to double or triple your electric rates to do solar. So, you know, we're interested in doing renewables, but we want to keep your electric rates reasonable as well. Hey, the one thing we do have some biomass. Pine trees. Man, Georgia is loaded with pine trees. Check it out. Brown is good. Look, brown and red's good. So we do have a lot of biomass here. So we are actually pursuing the development of 2 and possibly 3 fairly large biomass projects. We've announced those. You may have heard Governor Perdue actually make the announcement for us a month or so ago. We would locate these in South Georgia. Just very quickly, this is kind of like, here's Augusta. Atlanta would be up here. So what you're looking at here is really south of I-20. Think of it that way. We've identified 3 wood baskets. Wood baskets meaning good sources for where you'd have to reach out and pull your fuel from, because you do have to reach out on a 50 to 75 mile radius to be able to bring this fuel in to burn it. We've identified 3, and we're looking at sites in Washington County, maybe up in Warren County in this first wood basket. We're looking at Appling County, maybe Wayne County in the second one, and we're looking at Eccles County down in this one. And obviously we'd reach down into Florida for some fuel supply there. Each one of these plants would burn about 1 million tons of wood a year. We would anticipate having to do some whole tree chipping. In other words, actually cut down some trees and burn the whole thing. But we're really focused on a lot of the waste wood that comes out of the pulp and paper industry, even through timber, where you harvest the trees and you see all those tree limbs and tops, even the roots left out. And what do? They just burn them right there in the right there where the forest used to be. What we'd like to do is haul that in and burn it and make electricity out of it. Somebody asked me, Tom, are you going to cut down all of Georgia's trees and burn them up? And the answer is really simple. Of course not. These plants cost between $400 and $500 million to build. It'd be kind of foolish for us to invest that much money in a plant and then burn up all our fuel and not have any fuel left over. So we're going to obviously do this in a very sustainable way. When trees are cut, we're going to see that they're replanted. Again, burning these wood chips. Now, we haven't finished the design. This is kind of interesting. We haven't finished our plant design yet. We're thinking most of the chipping, we have to burn them in wood chips. We're thinking most of that chipping will occur out in the woods, out in the field, and that trucks will bring them in already chipped. So you say, well, how do you unload those trucks? Well, you can see trucks there. There's a conveyor that would haul it over and stack it up on a big pile of it. So what we do is we take those trucks and we turn them up and dump them out and set them back down. Now that I don't know that we're actually going to do this. Another biomass project does. They say they don't lose many trucks like this. Not, you know. The drivers insist on getting out first thing in there. So I did talk nuclear. There's one of our existing plants, Plant Vogel 1 and 2. That is steam, just so you know. That white stuff is steam. It's good. It does use water, and that's one of the potential drawbacks of any power plant. They use a lot of water for cooling, but that's not pollution you see there. That's steam. But look at all the green area in front of it, and we're proposing artist rendering to put 2 more units on that green area. Plant Vogel was originally designed for 4 units. 2 were only built, so it's a natural place for 2 more. Now, having said that, I have 2 more slides and I'm done. I hope I'm on time. this is kind of interesting. This looks at today versus 10 years from now, and this is just looking at Oglethorpe and what we see happening. Capacity versus energy. Let me explain that to you. Capacity means where you would get your energy if you had everything wide open, running as hard as it could. Every single plant that you owned, if it was running just as hard and full output as it could, you could potentially get 41% of your energy out of gas today, and only 20% out of nuclear, and only 25% out of coal. Well, you already heard me say we get 40% of our energy from nuclear, so I'll explain that to you in a minute. Where we see this going in the future with our additional nuclear build out, you'll see that stays about the same, and we're going to be building some more gas units, so you see that going up, and you see coal going down. Not surprising, and coal is just not something that can really get built today. But this is how it could be produced. This is how it's actually produced. And so a final takeaway I'll leave with you on this is that over 80% of our energy out of our portfolio today comes from coal and nuclear. These are what are referred to as baseload units, meaning you start them up and you run them around the clock. 24/7, you just let them go flat out. We don't run our gas plants like that. Our gas plants have a lot of stop and starts to them. We have those because they're cheaper to build, even though they're expensive to operate. We only turn them on at those peak times. For example, in the middle of the summer, in late afternoon when it's hotter than blue blazes and everybody's got their air conditions going, the demand for electricity is higher. That's when we start our gas units to meet that demand. So they run very little of the time. That's why you see we have 41% capacity on the previous chart. I'll back up. If you look here, 41% of our energy could come from gas, but in fact, only 9% of it does because we don't run them very often. In fact, we don't run them unless we have to. Again, the lion's share comes from nuclear and coal. And you can see we're going to stay there with nuclear. You can see our coal is shrinking, but as we add more gas facilities, it's inevitable that more and more of our generation will come from gas. We don't like that because it's very volatile. It can be very expensive, but still only 20%, even as far out as 2018, will come from gas. So I hope as you leave today, you'll have a better sense for what cooperatives are, for what electric cooperatives are, for the role that electric cooperatives actually play in the state of Georgia. We work hand in hand with Georgia Power and with the cities. We have a great relationship. And I know you're all dying to say, after seeing this, how can I be a member of an electric cooperative? Because it sounds too good to be true, right? It sounds great, and I'm backing up here. The answer is you have to build your home in a red area. You can't choose who you buy your power supply from. But in the early 1970s, the state of Georgia did a territorial law and said if you live in a certain area, you're served by that provider. So if you live in one of those red areas, if you live in suburban Atlanta and pretty far out, odds are good you're served by an EMC. You may still have Georgia Power because you can see they have spots, and you may have like the city of Marietta. But if you want to be a co-op member, you're going to have to live in our territory. So thanks for having me today, and I hope it was worth your time. Thank you.
Did you take a few questions?
Oh yes, yeah. I certainly have time.
Yeah. Now, as regular attendees know, we're going to be podcasting today's presentation. So please, as you ask a question, hold up your hand, let us bring you a microphone. That way everyone can hear you in the room, and you'll also have your question recorded on the podcast, so the answer will make a little more sense. So any questions for Tom?
I'll even take questions about Georgia Tech football if you like, but I don't.
I'm curious, what percentage of the power that you sell do you buy from out-of-state sources?
Yes. That's a good question. The question was how much of the power that we actually sell do we buy from out-of-state sources? Not an awful lot. One of the problems we have is what we call transmission interfaces, the ability to get power from one state into another. And the flow of electricity in the southeast is generally to the south. Florida takes a lot of power from out of state that travels through Georgia, but we do buy some, and we will when it's cheaper to buy some power from North Carolina or South Carolina or even Alabama, when it's cheaper to buy power from a supplier who has some excess, cheaper than starting our next unit like a CT, which can be pretty expensive, we'll buy that power. Seldom do we sell a lot, because generally we're a net purchaser, so we usually use all of our power. So I'd say a very small percentage. On average, our members probably purchase roughly as much as 20% from out of state, but Oglethorpe probably less than 5%.
Texas, is this on?
Yeah.
I think I recall Texas being one of the more open states as far as allowing allow people to buy power from many different sources. Is that going to happen in Georgia, and how do you see that happening?
We don't think so. The question is, and I'll rephrase your question, is that the state of Texas, as an example, is a state that deregulated and has competition in the electric market, so that you can choose your power supplier, who you buy your power from. Remember, I told you, you have to, if you want our power, you got to live in the red area. And bulldogs, you should want to do that, live in the red area. So remember, a few years back, Georgia deregulated the natural gas market, and actually today it's working pretty good. But those first couple years when it started was a disaster. And the legislators and the Public Service Commission said, I don't want any part of even thinking about deregulating the electric market in Georgia, so I don't think that's on the table for any time in the future. And one of the reasons for that is that our cost of power here in Georgia and the Southeast generally is below the national average. So the states that you saw really pushing for competition and deregulation had very, very expensive power to begin with. And guess what? Now that they've deregulated, their power costs have gone even higher. You think deregulation and competition would lower pricing. It does initially, but it hasn't sustained itself in these other markets and creates reliability issues and concerns. So I think Georgia has a system. We're highly integrated with Georgia Power, the Southern Company, and the municipal towns. I think we've got a system that works really well. So I think the old adage, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And I think we're going to stay the way we are for some time. Question in the back there.
You. I know that your company is spending a lot of money to control or eliminate pollution, particularly with the coal facilities and I would guess the biomass facilities that are coming online. Could you comment a little bit about how that might be affecting your overall capital costs as you go forward?
Yes. The question really is an awareness that we're spending a lot of money for environmental compliance, clean air, clean water compliance that's mandated by installing a lot of pollution control equipment on existing facilities, as well as designing new facilities for those. And I think the question was, how does that impact your capital cost over a period of time? A real fascinating statistic that I can give you that about sum it up is this. For our coal plants, Sharon, Wansley, that I showed you earlier, by the time we hit 2015 or 16 or so and are finished with all of our pollution control related improvements, our original cost in those facilities will now have doubled. So we'll have twice the capital cost, and guess what? We're going to get less electricity out because we have to use some of the electricity we produce to operate the pollution control facilities. So it's going to cost you twice as much and you get less out of it. There's a deal. But the air will be clean, the water will be clean, and we'll be in compliance with all the laws. So it's a very, very expensive endeavor, but one that we're undertaking, sometimes voluntarily, but mostly because it's mandated by law. Okay. Right here.
Is there any way you can store power, or does it have to be used as it's produced?
Right. Question is, can you store power, or does it have to be used as it's produced? Generally speaking, you use it as it's produced. However, our pump storage hydro facility is kind of a way that we store it. By pumping the water up, we actually use electricity, pump it up so that we can release the water. That's technically a storage. It's not really storing the electrons itself, but it's storing the water that will create those electrons. There are a number of studies underway now that would use things like compressed air storage, salt caverns, where you would, same concept as the water, where you would use electricity in the off-peak periods, push it in, pressurize it, and then when you release it, creates the electricity. So you're storing electricity in a different form. We're obviously researching fuel cells and batteries that may provide for some storage, but those are technically not where they need to be yet, and very, very expensive. So, but there's a lot of research going on the ability to generate electricity so that when the wind blows, that's the real problem with wind. You only get electricity when the wind blows, and when it stops, you don't have anything. So the idea, and guess what? The wind likes to blow at times we really don't need the power. So in those non-peak period times, like through the night. So if there's a way we can figure out how to store that when the wind does blow, then it could make our system much more efficient. There's a national research organization called Electric Power Research Institute, which Southern Company's heavily involved in, Oglethorpe's heavily involved in. We're doing a lot of research on that front, but it's not very viable today.
Yes, there's an ongoing dialogue in Washington about a renewable portfolio standard. How do you feel about a mandated renewable portfolio standard coming from Washington, applicable to all states?
The question is about a nationally mandated renewable portfolio standard, and what that means is a requirement that a certain amount of your power supply portfolio has to come from renewable resources. And there's been a push for some time, and it's going to be renewed with the new administration to come up with federal legislation that would mandate that for all states. And the question is, how do I feel about that? I don't like it. And I don't like it, and Georgia doesn't like it for the reasons I've just showed you, that our ability to generate renewable resources to be a significant amount is extremely difficult to do. One of the things that we're doing at Oglethorpe, we just helped form another cooperative. Imagine that, to try to get a service that we can't do here in Georgia. We just formed a national renewables cooperative, and we have participation from electric cooperatives all over the country to try to develop projects where they do work, like wind projects in the Midwest, that would count towards our renewable standard. Now, I don't know if they'll count or not till you see the legislation, but I will tell you this, and our senators, our representation in Washington are fully aware of this, that if we have to have 10% or 15% or whatever percent of our electricity coming from renewable sources in the state of Georgia, we just got taxed, because we'll have to pay the penalty because we can't do it. And so it's going to be like imposing a tax on us, which will be the penalty you have to pay if you can't produce it. And I've shown you that we're very, very limited on renewable resources here in Georgia. So we are not opposed to portfolio standards for renewables, but mandated we are. I hope I answered your question. I think you knew the answer when you asked me. Question. Okay.
About 3 questions. How far can electricity be transmitted, and maybe that's transmitted economically? Number 2, how do you go about predicting the energy usage in Georgia and then planning for that? How far ahead of the curve you have to be? And then the softball, number 3, any predictions for the game Saturday after next?
Gosh, my friend Phil, thank you for asking me those questions. My ex-friend Phil. Well, let's see, where did we start? How far can electricity be transmitted? You know, the real answer is that you, let me just do like this. You push an electron into this end of the wire, and it pushes out one that's on this end of the wire. So the electrons you put in there aren't the ones you ever actually receive. So if you're buying electricity from Alabama, a generator in Alabama, odds are good that electricity, those electrons get used in Alabama, but it displaces other electrons in the system. So fact of the matter is, it can be, you can arrange a transmission path over multiple states. You just have to have the transmission capacity to be able to do that. The lines are pretty full already, so to be able to put more in there is a very difficult thing to do. The key is the electron you put in Maryland isn't the one that comes out in Georgia. If you're, I'm trying to be simplified with my answer on that, but you can negotiate a path for transmission that covers multiple states. It gets to be very, very expensive to do that because you're paying other utilities for use of their transmission system. And that's what these people at this table here do, so you may ask them and they probably can give you a better answer. The next one is forecasting the demand. our load forecast. We just finished our load forecast for the state of Georgia, and not much of a surprise that we're pretty flat in 2008 over 2007. But as we look forward, the co-ops, as you can imagine, based on what I've described, surrounding Atlanta have been the growth engine for the state. If there's been growth in the state, it's been in co-op service territory. So we've been averaging over the past 10 years, let's say, about 5% annual growth. Compare that to Georgia Power, which has been averaging maybe around 2%, and compare that to the cities, which have been averaging like Marietta or Valdosta, which have been averaging a little less than 2%. Our 5% from 2 years ago went down to about 4.25% last year, and after completing our forecast this year, it's now down to 3.25%. And I think that still might be optimistic. So we run a number of sensitivities on that. As you can imagine, we're building that nuclear plant today. We've been into it now for a couple years. We don't expect it to go operational until 2016. So the lead time, you're building something, you start at 10 years ahead of time for when you actually need it. So you really do need to be careful with your forecast that you don't get into an overbuild situation, but at the same time build enough to keep the lights on. So it's a challenging situation for us, no doubt. The way we manage that at Oglethorpe ultimately is through the addition of these simple cycle combustion turbine units, our peakers, our gas facilities. These are like big jet engines in layman's terms that can start and stop pretty quickly, and we can build those in a really short period of time. In fact, we've been known to start and finish in about 12 months' time. So if we get a little behind the ball, we can put those on the ground. We don't want to be too dependent on it. Our focus today has been on those big base units that run around the clock. And finally, a prediction on the game. I think I'll take a pass on that. Let's see how we fare tonight, and then I'll be in a better position to forecast that.
Nuke, and I got out in '96. In '96, there was a lot of discussion about the nuclear industry, and we're going to build some plants, and it's now 2008, and we're still talking about the nuclear industry and building some plants. What's the state of our nuclear industry, and why haven't we built any plants?
Well, I think there were a couple of things. The questions about the state of the nuclear industry, why haven't we built plants? This is a little more complex than just the simple answer I will give you. But there was a time back in the, I believe, the late 70s, when the government put a moratorium on gas, on natural gas, saying that you can't use natural gas in industry or you can't build power plants that burn natural gas. They were concerned about petroleum embargoes, et cetera, and natural gas fell into that. So the only plants that were built really through the 70s and the 80s were these big baseload facilities, coal and nuclear. And fact of the matter is, we built more of those than we needed during that time frame. Because we had to cycle them up and down. What I mean by that, when you'd fall into the evening hours and people would reduce their demand for electricity, you had to back down your coal generators. You couldn't put it into the system. There was nowhere for the electrons to go. So you'd have to back down your coal plants, and that's not the way you run coal plants. And the way you want to run them is turn them on and let them go around the clock. So what you do, ultimately over time, we've kind of grown into those coal and nuclear plants, and then you've seen this wave of construction for gas-fired facilities around the country. Really, it's about all that's been built over the last 10 years are natural gas facilities, and they are better at stop and starts and filling that void at the very top of your demand. But what's happened is we continue to grow. Now we need some more of those things that run around the clock, and so we're back into looking at nuclear and coal. The problem with coal, obviously, is the great debate over climate change and the potential implications for CO2 and capture and storage and so forth, that none of us really know how we're going to deal with that just yet. So coal has almost come to a grinding halt. Nuclear, there is a resurgence of nuclear. And one thing that's changed about it, where in the past we built all these one-off nuclear plants, each one had kind of its own design and had its own challenges. Now we're going to a standard design. And the standard design is really developed by Westinghouse and by GE, General Electric. And then there's a French company, Areva, that's also trying to enter that game. And the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is certifying the design of those. And so we should see standard deployment of nuclear facilities where they're all kind of the same, and you can learn from each other on what works best or not. But it's a combination of a need for additional baseload supply going forward, additional generation generally, But we built so much gas recently, we need to get back to some of these other traditional resources and also do renewables where we can. So that's where nuclear is fitting in. I think it's a real resurgence. The new administration is going to weigh in on that. We'll just have to see what their view will be or not be. Oh, Bill.
Hey, Tom, a great Bulldog scholar, Louis Grizzard, said that even Vanderbilt could beat France.
Yes.
Do you know how France ended up with 80% of their energy coming from nuclear?
I don't. I think it's a government program first and foremost. I think they just made a commitment. We're going to build nuclear, and when you first started building nuclear, this was the word, and it's because of this. It's so cheap. The fuel is so cheap, and the capital cost to build them back when they first started and weren't very expensive. They said nuclear is going to be too cheap to meter. I mean, it's not even worth measuring. It's just like free, and that changed. But I think France had a lot of theirs built in that time frame. Our first nuclear plant, Plant Hatch, which I showed you earlier down in Appling County, built back in the 70s. It would cost us about 15 times as much to build it today as it cost us to build it back then, to give you an example.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question or so.
I'm in a red area in Houston County under the leadership of Bob Ray with Flint Electric.
Yes.
And have a landfill, state-of-the-art landfill there that was emitting methane gas,
Right.
and then Flint, our local EMC, got involved with a capturing of that to clean our air. And also, does that have any potential in the grand scheme of things to capture our landfills?
Absolutely, and we're doing that. And once again, we saw a need to get into the renewables area, but with some projects that are pretty small. So we formed yet another cooperative, and it's called Green Power EMC, and Flint is a member of Green Power EMC, I believe. And but let me say that these are nice to have. Let me put it in perspective for you. We're about a 10,000 megawatt system. I know that doesn't mean much to you, but I'm just going to put it in perspective. 10,000 growing to 16 or 17,000. So we need to be adding big chunks of generation. And we do that with these CTs. They're about 180 megawatts. Combined cycles are about 550. The units at Vogel 3 and 4, they're 1,200 megawatts each. They're pretty good chunks of capacity. The landfill you're talking about is usually 1 or 2 megawatts. How many landfills do we need to have to really be a factor? They're round off error, but they're important to capture because it's kind of a free fuel. It's renewable, deemed to be green certified. But in the big scheme of things, they don't add up to very much. We probably have about 6 or 7 of them that we're doing right now, and it's less than 10 megawatts. And I'm out trying to add about 6,000 or 7,000 megawatts. So we have a cooperative that deals with that. It's more of a small thing. The biomass that we're doing on a grander scale, though, they're 100 megawatts each, so you can see they start to add up a little bit. That's why we're interested in those at Oglethorpe. So, yeah, very important to do. We're building a plant up in North Georgia that burns chicken litter. It'll be mixed with some other biomass, but we're trying to be as creative as we can. I guess that's a renewable fuel. I don't know, but so.
Okay, Tom,
Robert,
thank you so much for your remarks. Appreciate that. On behalf of the Terry College, I want to present you with this sculpture by a local artist, Paul Benzunas.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you for your
Appreciate
remarks.
that.
And remember, as you're leaving the parking deck, just mention that you were at Terry Third Thursday, and that'll be your ticket out of here. So, hope to see you in January. Have a good holiday season.
Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. That was
Thank
great.
you. Well, I hope you enjoyed it.